Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for last week, and thanks again for today, the opportunity to work with you today. Today's session is an extension of data analysis for continuous school improvement. So we did a 2-day session in October that was a big picture 2-day overview. Last week we did kind of a refresher, and this week the focus is really on next steps and action items. But there's a couple things that I'd like to do first, and based on our agenda last week, there were some important things that we talked about, so I'd love to dig deeper into them today, if you don't mind. We only have an hour for today's meeting, so I'm going to try to cut it off soon enough that folks can ask questions. If you have questions as we go along, please enter them into the chat box, and then at the very end, we can just come off mute and ask any questions at the very end that you'd like to discuss. So very quickly, again, if this is your first time seeing me and working with me, my name is Brad Geisey. I work with Education for the Future, which is a nonprofit initiative that was founded out of California State University, Chico. Our mission is to build the capacity of learning organizations to use data for continuous school improvement. So we give folks, I'm not an external evaluator, we give folks a framework and tools and resources for using data for continuous school improvement. We published 22 books over the last 30 years on data analysis and continuous school improvement, and this is the book that you'll receive after today's session, I understand. And everything that we discuss is lined up with this book. Okay, so you'll see page numbers and references as I go through the slides. And you'll see those in all of my previous slides as well. Okay, so we discussed previously, just as a quick review, the kind of approaching the work in terms of the why, the what, and the how. Why being establishing the difference between compliance for accountability and vision as our focus for improvement. This is really, really, really super important. We want to make sure that vision is where we're headed and what our focus is. This is the definition, the research-based definition of what vision is. Vision defines the desired or intended future state of an organization or enterprise in terms of its fundamental objectives relative to key core areas, curriculum, instruction, assessment, and environment. So in terms of the why, we want to create a shift. Most people's heads are in compliance most of the time when they're thinking about data and school improvement. We want everyone focused on vision as their why. And so the next piece is then you have to have a framework. And we talked about this in detail in our previous sessions and even last week. You need to have a framework that places mission and vision appropriately within a framework for school improvement. So the big ticket items here, there are 4 pieces to any improvement process, regardless who you're talking to or what you're talking about. You have a discovery phase, which is at the top. What do we know? What don't we know? What do we have? What do we need? What are we doing well? What do we need to do better? That's this whole, what currently this discovery phase. Now, remember, we've been doing the work for 30 years, so these proper nouns have changed and evolved, right? But we've always been talking about this discovery phase leading to vision, leading to plan, leading to evaluation. So now the most common proper noun is comprehensive needs assessment, up there as the discovery phase. So you have discovery, vision, plan, and evaluation. So a lot of folks approach planning as if it's just for compliance for accountability. In the context of improvement here, we want to make sure that we're looking at planning as a function of realizing the vision, allocation of resources to realize the vision. So in order to complete, so basically the plan is the difference between your needs assessment and the vision. The plan is the difference between the needs assessment and your vision. But to do a good needs assessment, you have to have 3 big components. You have to be looking at trends and patterns. You have to be looking at problem-based analysis, and you have to be looking at program and process data. So those, as you go through the work of improvement, you also have to be clear about using multiple measures of data at each stage. So you have to be looking at demographics, perceptions of climate and environment, learning data, and process data. And so we talked about that quite a bit. I'm going to give you some advanced slides, some groovy advanced slides. And if you'll check these out, they go into more detail about the work that we've done. So basically, it takes the comprehensive needs assessment and it breaks it out. And I think that this is important because last week we were talking about the transition and how you sequence the work of improvement. So how do you sequence to get yourself from this discovery phase into program and process to mission and vision? And there was some discussion of reverse engineering and stuff like that. And I want to clarify that today. We'll get into that in a minute. But I think that this is a really helpful way to think about it. We're using data analysis to identify, own, and internalize the need to improve, and then we're transitioning into that, digging it deeper into programs and processes. This additional slides that I prepared for you are those that nest the tools directly in with the framework. So in the first step, you're looking at, or this first phase of discovery, you're looking at trends and patterns in your data over time. You're using a data profile to do that, and you're using that strengths challenges protocol. And how do we get to where we are? You're looking at problem-based analysis. In both cases, you're digging deeper into program and process. So you're using the information gathered in these two steps, trend and pattern analysis and problem-based analysis, to dig deeper into program and process. And there I gave you a representation of the program evaluation template and flow charting. These are really important. We've got to be able to look at program and process at 3 levels. I'll focus mainly just on these 2. Of the program evaluation template is program redesign, and then getting into implementation through flow charting. This is the crux of improvement. This is the crux of improvement. This is where real change takes place. This is where you change the way that you work. You have to do that in an informed way. So you need data analysis that's being set up to help inform that. So you're gathering the implications from that improvement work all in one document. So this is very, very, very important. I'm going to talk about this a little bit more in a little bit, but this is probably one of the most important documents that you can create, this aggregate implications. So the aggregate implications is your summary. Let me take it out of our book language. This is your comprehensive needs assessment summary, or your summary of findings for your comprehensive needs assessment. So you literally have to take the work that you're doing in each one of these areas and say, like, for instance, here, when you're doing strengths challenges implications, you're literally taking the implications and figuring out what the corresponding items are that need to go into each one of these boxes. From that, you develop the vision, then the plan to implement the vision, and then evaluation is set up because you're doing deep program and process work. So there's a couple things. So those slides are all in there. They're all set up to support that work. We've discussed these things previously. I wanted to discuss 4 big ticket items before we get into the next steps that I think are really important because you brought them up in the chat box last week. So first, school improvement focus, so what should the school improvement focus be? Program and process. When we're doing data analysis, we are getting identifying programs and processes, but also the context for improvement. Carl, is it possible to condense the process? For example, by no flow charting? You can't. I mean, you can only, so everyone's looking at the chat box, I hope, and are seeing Carl's question, which is a good one. You really can't. But what okay, so let me answer it straight, and then I'll give you the longer version. No, because you have to be able to, in order to evaluate something, you have to be able to describe it incrementally so that it can be evaluated, right? So the implementation stage of, so think about it this way. I want you to do a program evaluation template on your PLCs, and then I want you to flow chart what you're going to do in your PLCs in terms of implementation, like either the big picture that you see on the screen right now or what you're going to do during your meetings. You have to describe it incrementally so that you can evaluate it. You cannot evaluate what you can't describe. Okay, so, and our definition of evaluation is to explain how we're getting our results, not negative accountability. So we want to evaluate, we have to be able to describe it. If we want to change our programs and processes, we have to put data to it, because that's the trigger that allows us to change our thinking. Yeah, so you can't really condense it, unfortunately, but this is the flip side that I'll give you. if you're not digging into programs and processes, your process is identifying need and then immediately taking the same thing and created the problem to solve it. And I've seen it a million times. This breaks down into committee work and all kinds of other stuff that takes way longer than just going in and doing a 30-45 minute flow charting activity. So if you're in a cycle where you're trying to do improvement without doing the incremental work, you're stretching it out and elongating the process like crazy. And I'll give you some tools we're going to talk about building a timeline and figuring out what you want to do and all that good stuff as the next section. But let's talk about school improvement. So 4 things we're going to talk about real quickly. What's our school improvement focus? Number 2, setting the stage to be better consumers of student learning data. 3, critical artifacts of improvement work, reverse engineering, and challenges in engaging all stakeholders. These were things that came out of the chat box last week. Okay, so I want to run through them real quickly. So first of all, when you're doing school improvement, your focus is identifying programs and processes, but it's also on identifying the context for improvement. So this is why you need to do the engagement of all staff. And this is really important because there have been questions about, can we streamline the process? Can we do this? Can we do that? You are only going to get improvement to the degree that you engage stakeholders in the process of improvement. I see it from the perspective of I want everyone participating in the solution and brainstorming what the solution could be. So in addition, the wider or the more that I engage my staff and stakeholders in the process of improvement, the more information that I get that can fuel change. Let me give you an example. This is a problem solving cycle example. So this is the one that I've used with you in the past. And remember, this is 20 hunches and hypotheses and all that good stuff. So first we identify the problem, then 20 hunches and hypotheses, then the questions and data needed. So again, I'm looking to identify a program and process and then the context that's going to go along with fixing that program and process. And I'm using just this one tool to illustrate that concept. So not enough students are proficient in math. We generate 20 hunches and hypotheses about why we think that's happening. So you see the first 10 are valid. They may be a little bit external, but they're valid. Everyone's reading through those. Too many students live in poverty, lack of parent support, too much student mobility. So you're seeing multiple measures of data and how we solve problems. Sorry. So next is I turn the corner on the hunches and the hypotheses. And do you see how we get some ownership? Now take a look at number 19. I've identified collaboration as the process. Okay, so there is the program or the process that I have identified. And as I look into questions and data needed, I start to dig deeper into what the issues really are around that particular problem. So let me give you a summary based on my hunches and hypotheses and the program that I identified. Through that problem-solving cycle, I identified collaboration as the thing that I want to work on, PLCs, whatever, data teams, whatever we want to call it. So the context is we have to consider the demographics of who we serve. We have to be focused on student engagement, communication, system support, data use, curriculum standards, expectations, values, beliefs, and professional learning. Those all came, let me cement those in your brains for just a minute. Those all came from the hunches and hypotheses. So let me go back to those. Too many students live in poverty. Lack of parent support, too much student mobility. There's all those different, if you phrase those as positive outcomes, if you phrase those positively, those become outcomes that we want to achieve. And so I'm not just identifying collaboration, I'm also identifying a lot of the context that has to go along with fixing that thing. So my point is that there's a lot more than just buy-in to the fact that we need to engage stakeholders in the process of improvement. Okay, so when you're looking at generating information for change, you really need to be doing the data analysis on the front end so that, and because there were some comments made about reverse engineering and the role of the plan and all that. I want to be very clear about the progression between the discovery phase and what those 3 elements are, then to the vision, then to the plan, then to evaluation. And the fact that in a comprehensive needs assessment, you have to do those, you have to engage those three elements: trend and pattern analysis, problem-based analysis, and program and process data. So I'm just using problem solving as an example to say we really need to engage everyone, because our focus needs to be on identifying the programs and processes. But in the process of doing that work, you're going to get a lot of the context for change. Okay. The next one is setting a stage to be better consumers of student learning data. This is a facilitation note. And I don't know if you remember in the chat entry, this was the comment that was entered into the chat box. Could you further elaborate the rationale behind not considering student learning data in the initial phase of school improvement? This is because I think most people's approach to improvement has been either a misapplication of student learning data or a sole focus just on problem-based analysis, root cause. Okay, so everything's phrased. Let me go back to this slide. The easiest part of a needs assessment is number 2, problem-based analysis. If I do number 1, I need to have the data prepared and ready to analyze. So I need to have data by multiple measures and subgroup over years. That means I have to have the data. The third one is program and process data. That's just really hard. A lot of people are being sold that root cause, which is not a thing, it's actually contributing cause, but root cause analysis is doing school improvement. It is not. It is one aspect of school doing the work of a comprehensive needs assessment. But it's easy. I can do it with you in 20 minutes and you don't have to have any data prepared, and it's super easy to facilitate. So if I'm coming in selling you school improvement, I can oversell 2 and really make you feel like you're accomplishing something. So that one's a real toughie. So the deal is, I never want to come in and lead with, we've been doing it wrong. So if we've been misapplying student learning data, misapplying root cause, the best thing to do is not to come in with student learning data first, but to instead create new practice using another area of data and then apply that practice to student learning data. So setting the stage is about creating kind of a stacked sequence. So that would be using strengths, challenges, implications, and like demographic or questionnaire data to lead. Or starting even with problem-based analysis. If you really wanted to take something that's focused on student learning and build it back out to multiple measures, you could start with problem-based analysis, but not, it won't let you just go to the gap and go to root cause. Let me go to the chat box real quickly. I've also personally faced the challenge of identifying and addressing data gaps when analyzing trends and patterns. The presence of missing information or incomplete data significantly hinders my ability to obtain comprehensive understanding of the situation. Okay. That's a biggie. If you're not using, if you're not, it says, for instance, demographic data. If you tell me that identity, community identity in your schools is important to you, but you're not looking at that data in your analysis, it's not going to magically show up in the solution. And that's kind of the crux of that comment that was just entered into the chat box. If you have gaps in your data analysis on the front end, they're going to follow you through the entire process. How do I know that? How can I prove that? Because when you get to the aggregate implications where you're recording all the findings of data analysis, you're seeing those holes. And when you get really good at this, like when I've done this for 30 years. So when I get to this point, I've heard the conversations and I know who I'm working with and what we're doing. And I can see the gaps following me through the process. The worst part of that is then when you get to your program change, you're going to have no information about identity informing your program change. So that is a huge challenge, okay? So let's go back to my list real quickly. Let's regroup, go back to the list. So my strategy in So let's add that onto what I just said. My strategy in positioning student learning data appropriately depends upon having good data. And I'll show you how to solve that in just a minute. But you got to have good data. And then what you can do is you can use alternative facilitation in other areas of data to create new practice around how we approach student learning data. The other thing, too, is I think it tells a better story. Let me put the 4 circles up. Check out the demographics. I'm working right now in indigenous schools in the US. So in demographic data, we learn all about the history of indigenous kids in our schools and how that population has grown and how they are linked to things like behavioral incidents, poverty, and all these other different things, right? So the demographic data tells us the history about who we are. And then we go to the next bubble and we learn about culture, climate, and environment and how they feel and about the school environment itself. So now we've seen demographics and the climate and environment. Now we go to the learning outcomes and it tells a logical story. Well, of course, they're not achieving to the degree that everyone else is because they don't see themselves reflected in curriculum, instruction, assessment environment. So it's strategic because of potential previous misapplication. I create sequence that helps create new practice by using other areas of data. And I put student learning data on the end because of their previous misapplication of student learning data. I want to change that, but not call it out directly and make them feel bad about it. The second thing is it tells a better story if I put it on the tail end, to be honest with you. So I'll use one of those other strategies. Okay, the next one is critical artifacts of engagement work and reverse engineering. Here's the chat entry that was entered last week. Do you think sometimes reverse engineering may lead? And so this, this was based on a misstatement that I made, or I didn't explain it well enough. What I was talking about is that you can take some of the artifacts of school improvement and use them to figure out what the holes are and then work backwards to solve those. Let me state it differently. Actually, the last chat entry is a great example of this. If you have holes that are going to follow you all the way through, when you get good at this, you know when to transition to the next step because you know you have a good amount of information. So I'm not to inform the next step. So when I get good at it, I know what I'm going to expect when I get to the step that you see on the screen. Ultimately, what I'm doing, I think I mentioned it in this context, I'm always thinking about the left-hand column of the program evaluation template when I'm working with you. I'm trying to figure out, do we have enough information? Do we have enough information? I'm working with you on data analysis, but my head as a facilitator or as a leader is in the PET because I'm trying to get us there as quickly as possible. So in my mind, I'm reverse engineering it, right? So I wasn't suggesting that you should reverse engineer with your staff. I was suggesting that as a facilitator, you have to be able to work backwards and forwards to understand where you want your staff to be and where you want the conversations to take place. So critical artifacts of improvement, I wouldn't call it reverse engineering now that I stated it that way and it was misinterpreted or I misstated it. What I would say is that let's look at critical artifacts of the work and make sure that they're hitting the mark when we get there. And if we're seeing gaps, why are we seeing gaps? And the last chat entry articulated that perfectly. If I'm not looking at multiple, how do I know that multiple measures of data is important? Because when you get to this point, you've only got a partially filled out implications template. Check this out. So you are being sold all kinds of information about what a comprehensive needs assessment is. Ultimately, any needs assessment work that you do has to inform this, which is a summary of findings of your improvement work. And I guarantee you, you cannot do this work that you see on the screen right now without looking at trends and patterns, problem-based analysis, and how you work. How do you solve problems? What are the trends and patterns in your organization over time? And how do you work? You have to have those 3 things reflected in the implications and multiple measures embedded into each one of those to see how you work over time. So the last chat entry was critical, and I'll talk about how to solve that. So I think the 3 most important artifacts that you're going to create are, number 1, your aggregate implications, because this is the summary of your improvement findings. 2, your PET work, because that's evidence of how you're going to change the way that you work. And 3, your vision of where you want to be. The plan is the difference between the implications and your vision. I throw the PET in there because that's the watershed moment of improvement work. So the last one that we were going to talk about is challenges and engaging all stakeholders. And this goes back to Carl's comment too. You guys are already thinking ahead to implementation. While implementing the needs assessment process, I've encountered challenges, particularly in engaging all stakeholders. What potential solutions and strategies can be considered to overcome the obstacles? Well, first of all, I have to say, if you go back to our October agenda, I presented it in an order that I would use with most schools. I would mess with the contents a little bit, but it's this why, what, how concept. The way that I approach it is that we all have to understand the why. Then we have to have a framework that allows us to implement based on the why. So why is about vision. Then we need a framework that shows us improvement work with vision at the core. And then we need to understand the how. How do we engage all stakeholders in the process of improvement, and where can we commit to that process, and how do we engage in that work in the facilitation? The October agenda that I built for you pretty much lays all that out along with the tools and resources. So the purpose of October was to actually give you a 2-day overview that actually rolled out in sequence the work as I would do it in a school. So first of all, I would go to that. Because it'll help you tremendously. It walks you through the why, what, how with activities at each stage. The other things I would tell you is you got to consider appropriate roles and responsibilities in what you're doing. If you feel like you're really time crunched, or you feel like you're all over the place in your improvement work, you may be doing things like involving families inappropriately in conversations about improvement. And what I mean by that is when you do a good parent questionnaire, you're getting feedback from them in a concise instrument once a year, and you are analyzing it. And then the questions that are in the questionnaire are entirely appropriate to parents only. So you've got a focus tool where you get feedback once a year, you analyze it, you bring it back to the parents to say, thanks for the feedback. This is what we saw, and this is what we're going to do about it. So you've got very specific engagement tools that are aligned with very specific roles and responsibilities. So you got to make sure that you're engaged. Yes, you do need to engage stakeholders, but that doesn't mean that you're having inappropriate conversations with families about things that they should not be involved in, like curriculum instruction assessment, those kind of things. So you got to consider roles and responsibilities and make sure that those are lined up, and the facilitation will naturally give you that. Whenever I think about implementing the work of improvement, I add value to what you have to get to what you need. So an easy get is all you have to do is commit to one thing. Like if you have PLCs, use problem solving in your PLCs as a first step to start to implement deeper strategies for data analysis and continuous improvement. So the example that I have is, so what I mean by add value to what you have to get to what you need, don't start with the hardest thing. Add value to something that already is there but is not formalized. So use problem solving to formalize existing conversations to get to implications in program and processes, what you really might need, right? So you're not committing to an entire year in one session. What you're doing is you're committing to just one thing that adds value immediately, right? When we did the October session, that was a year of improvement in 2 days. Okay, so usually the way that, well, I'm going to show you how to timeline it. A big one, the third one, and I hope this doesn't offend anyone, but I'm just going to say it. What should already be happening in the existing structures? So I have tons of people that are like, hey, we're doing PLCs, but we're not doing data. How can you be doing PLCs and not be doing data? So you may, in the world of PLCs, when everyone's doing PLCs, you have a natural vehicle to be doing data at that level within your organizations. So you leverage those existing structures that should already be engaging that work. right? And you change the way that they work. I go into schools all the time and they're like, PLCs, we're planning a baby shower during PLCs or something like that. You already have the time set aside and the resources. We're just not using it wisely. The other thing is you plot out a timeline from a to-do list, and I'm going to show you how to do that right now. Okay. Yeah, you have to use data to drive your change. You have to use data to drive your change. Why specifically? Let me give you my take on that. You have to use data to drive your change because it can't be personality driven. It's got to be based on data that's like the impartial arbiter, right? So it's got to be not based on personalities. It's got to be this impartial arbiter. You can equalize the playing field with data. So you give everyone the same data, they analyze it, it equalizes the playing field in terms of how we engage. You can easily use it to equalize the room. So you go individual, small group, large group with the data, and it starts to equalize the leadership throughout the organization. The biggest thing is this, though. Important is data. Improvement is all about what you don't know more than what you do know. It's more about what you don't know than you do know, what you do know. So you got to use data to figure out, what do I know? What don't I know? What do I have? What do I need? What am I doing well? What do I need to do better? You need a trigger. Otherwise, what you're going to do is you're just going to use the same thing that created the problem to solve it. You got to figure out what you don't know and apply new learning to that to change practice to get a different result. So that's really super important. What if if as a school, I do not have a consistent process for tracking and recording data? Okay, let's get into how can I engage stakeholders in such a situation to improve data tracking and recording practices? Let's get into it. Here are some potential action items, and we're going to talk about that very specifically. So the first is, so as you move forward, there's going to be some key requirements to support the work in schools. This is a great transition because now we talk about how do we actually support it and do it. And if we don't have the support there, it's going to be pretty difficult to implement. So the first thing is the books will be provided, and you're going to have that book resource. And that's all the facilitation guides, the how-to and everything. All session resources will be provided and are aligned to the book. So you're going to be able to take the session resources and you're going to be able to apply them to the book and see the actual implementation of that. Yeah, definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over. That's absolutely true. The third thing is, and I gave you, if you look in the agenda for today's session, I think it's like 20 pages long. I gave you a huge amount of resource material that I want to work through real quickly. So books are going to be provided. You'll have all the resources like PowerPoints and handouts and all that. The other three things that you should think about are, number one, developing data profiles systemically. You've got to organize the data, get it into a format where everyone's seeing it the same way. So first, developing data profiles. Two, creating a system-wide workbook or study guide for school improvement, especially for translating into Arabic, providing translated information into Arabic. You can't expect to translate the whole book. So we've got to have a strategy for providing resources in multiple languages. And then in doing that, we can also provide a step-by-step kind of guidebook and break the work out into sections. So you can look at the year of work and break it out into sections. And then developing timelines for implementation is 5. If you look in your handout packet and you look on the screen right now, I provided you with a 2-page summary of this information that I'm about to present, because this is not in a book or anything. I provided you with a 2-page summary with links and a bunch of support materials that I'm about to show you that are on the end of the agenda packet. So the agenda packet for today is like, I don't know how many pages it is. It's 23 pages long. So the agenda packet has all this information in it. Okay, the first thing is, and this is about having a consistent process for tracking and recording data. In order to be able to look at trends and patterns specifically in your data, you need to have a data profile in place to do that. And the data profile is basically the story of the school broken out into multiple measures of data. So it's literally your demographic data, your questionnaire data, climate environment data, and your learning data. And if you look in the book, there's an example that starts on page 267, I believe. And there are data profiles in there. I'm going to take the second to last comment in the chat box and talk about it and make even a further assertion. You need to track and organize the data, and you should never, ever, ever have to explain a graph. You should never have to explain a graph. I was in Australia recently. Basically what they did was they told everyone, bring your data and we're going to analyze it. They left it up to the schools to bring their own data. So what you had were teams that, if you're more adept at gathering and organizing the data, you're providing better analysis. If you're not, your analysis is not as robust. This is not acceptable. So what you have to do is you fix the vehicle that you're delivering the data within, right? You standardize the vehicle or the reports. The good news is that by standardizing it, you only have to do it once, and then you can update it year after year. And these data profiles can be used for all kinds of things. They can be used for any time that you want to access data. But basically what it does is, if you look at the screen, it shows, and if you look at the example that's in the book on 267, and I think I even provided a link to a PDF version on Dropbox. The data profile, you only need to be concerned about 3 areas: demographics, climate and environment through questionnaires, and your student learning data. The process stuff you get out through the PET and all that. So the first step is to familiarize yourself with the format. The second step is there are data inventories that I included in with your handout packet that allow you as a system to look at what is the data that we want included in our profiles. And we have some data. So these data profiles allow you to brainstorm exactly what data we want in there. You need to be doing this at a systems level. And I've offered myself to help you put these together. You're going to have some data that lives at the systems level, and you're going to have some data that lives at the school level. You're going to have to pull that together. But I have templates and I have resources to help you create data profiles. You basically want to equalize the playing field when it comes to that. Okay, so you really, if you're creating data profiles based on multiple measures, let's go back to demographic data. Your student learning data is already in the form of reports that can be aggregated into a profile. So student learning data is not a big deal. I'm not sure that you have questionnaire data. I haven't seen it. So you need a really good solution for climate and environment assessing via questionnaires that's systemic throughout your schools. And I can help you work on that. And that's going to be a follow-up item for me to figure out with you. Do you have that data? Do you need that data? Exactly where is that data? So these are questionnaires for staff, students, and parents. So you don't have to worry about processes. Learning data is already loosely formatted in profile. You just need to organize it. Perceptions is about getting at questionnaire data that might be a need just generally. Demographic data can be messy. So you're really only focused on demographics. The comment was, we do have climate and environment data via questionnaires. I'm just going to throw this out. I haven't seen it. People tell me that a lot. And when we get into perception data, the questionnaires that they're using are not a comprehensive assessment of school climate and environment. And I have all the research behind that and what it is. And if you have instruments, you can send it to me and I can do content evaluation for you. But I'm just telling you, you need to have a comprehensive assessment of school climate and environment for staff, students, and parents. And it has to be inclusive of identity. And so that could be faith identity, that could be cultural identity. It's got to be pretty comprehensive in scope for national and international schools. So it wouldn't be your typical off-the-shelf questionnaire. There are some very particular needs there for your organization. So I would say the next step there is, if you're willing to send it to me, I'm willing to do a content evaluation and write it all up, and I can give it back to you so that I'll line it up with the research. If it's good to go, then great. You just slide it in. But if you need some support there, I can provide that to you. So data profiles, really, really, really super important. The first step would be familiarizing yourself with the format of a profile and then digging into those inventories to start to create an idea of what you want in your data profile so that you can engage staff. Everyone on staff, regardless of their previous ability to use data, we should have data in a format so that everyone understands it universally the same, right? We want to equalize the playing field. You never, ever, ever want to have to explain a graph. So setting up those data profiles is a really, really super important next step. The next one is creating a system-wide study guide or workbook, especially for translated content. And what this does, I give you an example in your handouts, but if you look at this, this is a sample module from I think it was a 12-page study guide that I put together with another system of schools. This was a system of faith-based schools. And what we did is we organized school improvement into, I think it was 9 modules or something like that. And so we organized the work into 9 modules so that schools could see it broken up into big steps throughout the year. And they could identify that. And then when they were working in a particular step or a particular area of school improvement, they could see the read, do, and refer. And you see what those things are. Read is the book reference. Do has PowerPoints, templates, and handouts. And refer is examples. And then we actually had some videos that we recorded that were not longer than 2 minutes that explained different steps of the process. This would be critical because you could provide all the information in the study guide and all the linked information in Arabic. And so you're only going to have to translate the content that is immediately relevant to what you do in your schools. You're not going to have to do the whole book. So you're going to end with subset. Trust me, I've done this in a bunch of places. I've got it all in French. I've got it all in different languages, all of our resources in different languages. And this makes it much easier and much more achievable in terms of I'm just going through the different modules and I'm starting to fill them out with content in Arabic, like templates and examples and things like that so that you can have it in both languages. It's pretty doable. And I already have everything in English. I already have all the formatting. So I can organize it. We could set up a meeting or something like that where we start to organize the big modules, and then I just start to organize the resources. Do you see the blue links there? Those are links to Dropbox. And basically what we do is put supporting materials on Dropbox that you can click to out of this. The other thing you can do is just organize all this stuff in a Google Drive. That's the other alternative. The folders in the Google Drive are the modules themselves. And in each folder, you have a folder for read, do, and refer. And all we do is start populating that with English and Arabic. And so it can be done. This is done through a PDF, so it's very visual. The Google Docs thing would just be an electronic resource. Okay, so that's a good action item. The next one, the big one that you're all pointing to, is developing timelines. This is stunningly easy when you get down to it, if you really think about it. The first example that I have, I mean, it's difficult to noodle, but I can give you a very easy process for noodling out a very complex year of improvement work. Sometimes I have people do something like this, like throughout the system of our schools. This is where we do data collection, data analysis, goal setting, plan, and there's implement, evaluate, improve. I don't think that this is a great example, but it's got this is like a broad timeline across schools and how we do the work of continuous improvement in our schools over time. So that takes a year. That's not bad. I mean, that can be like a general guideline. The way that I really get to it is give you a study sheet that has next steps on it. And basically what you do, this is almost ridiculous in how you set it up, because I have people do it in a workshop format where they actually use poster paper and sticky notes. But check it out. First of all, you fill out the left-hand columns with the why, what, and how, with each individual steps in the process that you want to engage, right? And so you create a master list that's focused on just what you want your schools to be doing. And then the schools fill out the work to be done by whom and when. Okay, so when you take the when column and you sort everything by when, it becomes a timeline. Pretty good, huh? So you take the when and you sort it, and it becomes a timeline. And in there, you do have it. Okay, look at the bottom in the how. Do you see demographic data? There's an inventory, creating a profile, etc. So you build into the timeline how we're going to prepare systemically the data and all this other stuff so that we can support implementation with the schools. So you build into the to-do list those steps that you want to engage so that you make sure everything's timed out correctly. And so this allows you also to align compliance reporting and stuff like that. Like if you have plans that are due in April, then we place that in the timeline accordingly, and we know that we have to have X done before April, right? So it allows you to think about the entire year and how you do the work of improvement over time. So again, creating a timeline can be pretty simple. And there's actually an example of this in the book. You take the steps that you want to be part of your school improvement work at your schools, and you insert those in the left-hand column as the topic. And then you delineate or brainstorm the work to be done in each by whom and when. And then when you sort it by when, that becomes your timeline. So you're taking the incremental steps and brainstorming those. Then the system would know, hey, if all the schools want to be engaging their staff in using questionnaire work in November, then we know that we have to have questionnaires done by the late October, right? So you know systemically when you got to organize the data and provide that systemic support. So I would say the first thing is you tell me that you need to systemically organize the data and all that good stuff. I need timeline associated with that so that I can work backwards from that and say, okay, here are the steps between now and then so that we can get the data all prepared and get it aligned and all that good stuff. Okay. So those are the big ticket items that I have for you. The books are going to be provided. All session resources will be provided. We should consider the next 3 big ticket items: developing data profiles, creating a system-wide resource, especially for translated content, and developing timelines for implementation. And that's all summarized in this document. And there are all of those examples. The examples are either linked out of this document or they're after the document in your handout packet. So I think I included the entire version of this next step study sheet in the handout packet. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to, while you think of questions that you want to ask, I'm going to put my email up, because email is the best way to get in touch with me. And the other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to put the Dropbox links for the session resources in chat so that you have them. You know what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you the general Dropbox link for both sessions. So when I add in the sessions for today's resources, you're automatically going to have them. And here it is. The Dropbox link. Did you mention that while creating data profile, school processes? No, I didn't say that. School processes are the most important. Okay, they're the most important. I'm talking about when you're putting together your data profile, when you're actually organizing the data that comes from program and process is in the PET and in flow charting and in your program and process inventory. So it's not something that you can assemble in advance. It's something that you do as a result of engaging those other areas of data first. So if you're preparing a data profile, you're focused on those other 3 areas, not on program and process, because those are generated as a result of engaging those other areas of data. Have concerns about various processes as well, such as, without access to the specific data, I found it, I'm reading the the third to the last chat item, you've got to use, yeah, I mean, it's a big deal. If you don't have the data, okay, so let me, I'm fumbling with how to best express this, but I work in learning organizations all the time where, and I'm not saying that this is the case with you, so I'm not implying this relative to your organization, I'm saying in general. I go into an organization and they say, we have great questionnaire data, you need to use it. And I look at the questionnaire data and I can immediately tell, like I'm working with a faith-based school and they have no expression of faith identity, or I'm working with a culturally based school, like an indigenous school, and there is no expression of indigenous identity in their questionnaire data. Most identity comes from demographic and perceptual data. You know, demographic data tells us our changing demographics over time, which shows us the changing shape of our community identity over time. Then the perceptual data gets into specific concepts, like expressions of cultural or faith identity on campus and these different concepts relative to improvement. So I know going into it, they're telling me that they have great questionnaire data. I know that they don't. So as a facilitator, it's kind of like advanced facilitation. You're going into it knowing that you have holes in it and you're trying to solve that, but we're not really listening yet because we're not seeing it. What happens is you get to the implications, you get to this stage, you get to these two stages, this one, aggregating your implications from data analysis, and your PETs, and you have holes in those. You have program evaluation template. This is usually where I do it. So what I'll do is I'll say, okay, everyone put your implications up, and now I want you to go highlight everything that has to do with identity in our implications. They're not going to be able to do it, so then we have a discussion about why aren't we able to do it. Or I'll use the program evaluation template and say, go and highlight everything that has to do with identity in your program evaluation template. They won't be able to do it. We'll have a discussion about that, and ultimately it'll come back to we don't have the data that's helping us support that. The other thing that would happen is that if you're not assessing things the way that you really want to, do you see these columns that how is implementation being monitored? How should it be monitored? You're never collecting 100% of the data or collecting or using 100% of the data that you really need. So when you reconsider the program or process, you're building into it this change in how we collect and use data. And then the implications come down here in the bottom box of we need to collect data or organize data in a particular way. And then let me flip back to this. See, there's a data box here. So you're going to have to change the way that you collect and organize your data based on what you're doing in your program implementation. So you should always the system is not set up to support your improvement efforts. It's not. It's set up to support status quo, right? So if you want to change, it's not set up to automatically, intuitively know that you want to change the way that you work, so it should deliver differently based on this new way that you got to describe the new way that you want to work and then align resources to that new way that you want to work. So that's kind of the crux of the third to the last one is number one. I wasn't saying about that about processes. I was just saying it in the context of data prep for staff engagement. You're prepping those other areas of data, and the program and process data comes from the engagement of the PET flow charting and the program and process inventory that occur as a result of engaging those three areas. So in terms of upfront development of your profiles, you don't have to worry about processes yet. The big ones that you need to worry about are demographics, perception, and learning data. Yeah, that's again, the data gaps and all that, most people don't get that. So that's kind of an advanced use thing, and that's a biggie. And that's why I have data profiles up there. That's a real biggie, I got to tell you. That's kind of an advanced use. Okay. So the last thing that I'm going to say is, as a way to wrap before I open it up to general questions, because we have 4 minutes left, is last time when we talked about the framework, a comment was made about school improvement plans and how does the traditional approach to school improvement plans fit into the work of school improvement? Are they different? Are they the same? Okay, so most people think or focus on improvement being like a 5-year process. I create a plan every 3, 4, 5 years, and that I'm doing school improvement. I try to change that perspective. I've got a continuous improvement process and framework, and I pull from that to satisfy accountability whenever I need to. So you see the elements of the plan are embedded in the framework. I'm going through that as an annual process, doing the work of improvement, updating, revising, that kind of stuff. And then whenever I need to go through accreditation or a review process or something like that, I pull the plan out and I push it over to the compliance column. My focus is always on continuous improvement in the core framework. The concept is when folks are asking for the evidence of your improvement work, like planning and things like that, they're not providing you with a framework. They're asking you for evidence from a larger framework for improvement that you should be engaging. And so, yes, compliance for accountability is important, but you got to contextualize it. If you just react to compliance, you're just going to be reacting to what's tested, and nothing's ever going to get implemented. You've got to be focused on core improvement that's focused on vision, that's inclusive of identity and all this other stuff. And then you can pull out the items that you need to satisfy compliance when it's necessary. Any comments or questions? I put the Dropbox link in for the general set of resources. And what you're going to see within the next day or so is I'm going to drop the resources for today in there. I will be emailing Donna and Samina with the next steps in those items on the to-do list. And so I just will wait to hear from you about what you want me to do to support that work. That's not a contract-based thing, so I'm not selling you services. I'm doing those things because of the relationship that we have over time that was based on the work that we did in October. So this is just part of fulfilling the commitment to the work that we made back in October. Any comments or questions for the good of the order? Thank you for having me again. Thanks for the great questions and all the stuff in the chat. I'll get those things uploaded to Dropbox ASAP, and I'm looking forward to seeing you soon. Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening.
Thank you, Dr. Bradley. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you.
أهلا أستاذ إبراهيم.
Thanks, Brad. See you soon.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله.
Great to see everyone. Thank you.